But I like to go down into the root of it, right down to the underlying stuff, because that underlying stuff is great. Now, when Solomon built the first temple, it was built on this second idea of the male and the female. The third idea became that God created the universe out of the body of a dead goddess. That's the Babylonian story of Marduk and Tiamat. After the Babylonian exile from Judaism about 600 BC, they took on that Babylonian idea that the goddess had to be destroyed. And the universe was built on her body by the god. And then the final way of believing in God was a male god created everything. Which doesn't actually make sense, does it? In nature. But it's the system has taught us that. And we will all have been born, if we were born into Christianity, as in God is a male and God created everything, because that's the system, that's what the system believes. But it's not in the Bible. It's quite clearly not in the Bible. So Solomon builds this temple, and at this temple there was no animal sacrifice at the first temple in Hebrews. It was bread and wine. Now that's familiar, isn't it? We're not sure which ones did the bread and which did the wine. My favourite theory is the women brought the wine because it represents blood, and the men brought the bread. But whatever happened was the bread and the wine was brought, and it was laid at the base of two pillars outside the Holy of Holies, the centre of the temple. A black pillar for the feminine and a white pillar for the masculine. And then the priest and the priestess picked it up, took it into the sanctuary, where it was blessed by the god and goddess, and brought out and fed to the people. Again, very familiar, isn't it? And a lot of the worship took place outside. There was a temple, but where they worshipped the goddess aspect, they worshipped in groves, and they worshipped trees. They didn't actually worship the trees, but they revered the trees because it was Mother Nature. And they had parties, and they had a lot of fun. And in the temple itself, the area which later became to be known as the Court of the Women was the area for dancing and fun and feasts and delightfulness and families. And it was all rather good. And it is still there in the Bible, even though lots of it have been edited, that Bathsheba, Solomon's mother, was the one who crowned him. Because the queen was not the wife of the king, it was his mother. The mother crowned the king. And you'll see this perfectly in the story in the Gospel of John of Jesus at the wedding at Cana. It's Mary who says, go to it. And he says, I'm not ready. And she says, do what he tells you. And that echoing back to this first temple. Now, the first temple went corrupt because all religion corrupts. All religion corrupts. Because after you've lost the spirit, the initial pull, oh good Lord, I've been talking a long time, and I'll shut up in a minute. After you've lost the initial pull, you go into law. If you don't know what you're meant to do next, you follow the rules, right? If somebody says, I want you to go and perform at the Madhouse stage, you're going to follow the signs to the Madhouse stage, aren't you? You're not going to say, I'm going to set up my own stage over here. You're going to follow the rules. But people like Jesus would say, I'm not going to the Madhouse stage, I'm setting up right here, and you can come find me if you want to. But once you've lost the impulse from the original founder of the faith, you're going to lay down the law, and you're going to hold to the law until you find another way to find the faith. And what we have nowadays is a Christianity that has completely lost its faith, and it's holding to the law. And it's holding to laws that don't even exist. And the only law about women not being priests was St. Paul's one thing about saying, I do not suffer women to preach. And this is in Ephesians, and it's an edit. It was edited in after Rome took over Christianity, because Rome didn't believe in women priests. But the first temple is fascinating because it was this wine and bread temple which honoured divine masculine and divine feminine. And there's a wonderful scholar called Margaret Barker, Dr. Margaret Barker in Derbyshire, who's written wonderful books about this and gone into the archaeology and the Hebrew, and has come up with all this evidence about how we honoured the masculine and the feminine and this bread and wine. But unfortunately, there were other temples around for different gods, and they had matriarchal religions too, but they practiced sacrifice of the eldest son. So they'd gone corrupt, because all religions go corrupt. And then the Hebrew king, King Massena, didn't like his eldest son, so he had him sacrificed in the temple. And his grandson didn't like that, so when Josiah came to power, he closed the temple down. Completely closed it down. And allegedly, his high priest found the books of Deuteronomy and Numbers in the Holy of Holies, where nobody had ever found them before, over 1,000 years or so, but suddenly they turned up, as these things do. They do if you're Indiana Jones anyway. And after that, they said, okay, no women, no goddess, she's out. And you can see this all through Kings and Chronicles, where they say, tear down the groves, tear down the trees, tear down the poles. And then 30 years later, they were all invaded and carted off to Babylon, where they learnt about Marduk and Tiamat, about how the temple should be built on the body of the dead goddess. So that fitted. And then when they came back, they rebuilt their temple with Persian money. So this was society. The Persian emperor paid for the Jewish temple to be built on condition it had animal sacrifice. So they had animal sacrifice. And we know this because there was another temple in Egypt. The Jews were allowed to have a smaller temple in Egypt on an island called Elephantine. And when they started to build the second temple there, the Egyptians came along and said, no animal sacrifice, shut them down and kicked them out. And that's in the papyri, so we know that that is the case. So we have a second temple, which becomes the patriarchy. And then we have the coming of Jesus. And Margaret Barker's theory is that they were trying to get back to the balance of the masculine and feminine. And they were doing it for a while. For the first 300 years, they were doing it. St. Paul had female deacons. It's quite clear in his writings, the respect he had for women. But then the second Constantine took over, it all went down the pan in a very big hurry. And after that, St. Augustine invented original sin, which was blamed on the woman. That was in the 4th century. Judaism has no concept of original sin, therefore neither could Jesus. So that means Jesus did not come to die on the cross to save us from original sin. So why did Jesus come to die on the cross? He came to teach us how to give up, how to let go, and how to surrender so we can move on. And there's have you ever seen the Greek Orthodox cross? It has 3 crosses along it. The bottom one's angled. And these are representative of the thieves who were on the cross with Jesus. The first one says, if you're the Son of God, get us off here. That's the unrepentant thief. He's going round the wheel of karma again. They believed in reincarnation in those days. Honestly, they did. We don't believe that they did, but they did. So he was not taking responsibility for his life, so he was going to go on suffering. The second one says to Jesus, says to him, leave him alone. We knew what we were doing. We knew what the penalty for what we were doing. We are responsible for where we are, or at least partially. And Jesus turns to him and says, today you will be with me in paradise. And Jesus' own words in that very same gospel, which represent the top one, is, Father, forgive them, they don't know what they're doing. They don't know what they're doing. And that has to be the mantra for any Christian now, which is, Father, forgive them, or Mother, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. And the MAGA Christians in America do not know what they're doing. We have to forgive them, we have to love them, but we don't have to like them or approve of them or support them in any way, shape or form. So if any of this has been of use to you whatsoever, I'm thrilled. But again, don't believe a word I say. Go and check it out for yourselves. And thank you.